Set 12 goes live tomorrow, and here are some comps that you can play to dominate the ladder. Okay, so starting out in S tier, which have the standard 4 Arcana Xerath board. So if you're going fast 9 and you're playing around AP, then you pretty much always want to be playing towards Xerath. This is because the way Arcana works is if you select Xerath and you've bought a lot of charms towards the end game, you'll get a lot of bonus true damage. So you always want to make sure that you're selecting Xerath for your Arcana. And then your main front line is usually just going to be Rakan. You can also start to itemize Kench once you've fully itemized Rakan, but it's really just whoever you 2-star first. And then Milio is going to provide a lot of utility and items to the rest of the team. And if you're playing around Nora as well, you get a nice little mage package if you play around Veigar Vex. And then zillions of Preserver, so you're going to be getting Chrono in as well as Vanguard. Then of course you just play as many of the Arcana as possible. If you haven't purchased that many charms, you can drop out of some of the Arcana. For example, Hecarim and Ari can go for some better legendaries. You usually want to try and fit Morgana onto this board as well. It really just depends on which legendaries you hit first. If you don't happen to hit Nora that early, you can just drop the 3 mages, and then you can just play around Morgana. You can also play of course, Diana suits well with Hecarim, and then you can drop, if you, for example, drop the mages, then you can play a board more like this, and you can fit this at level 9. Next up, we have Full Blaster, Full Pyro. This is a pretty stock standard fast 8 board where you're playing, of course, AD centered around Varus and Nasus. Now, Varus really likes Shojin because he gets so much attack speed from his Pyro trait, of course, and if you stack up the Pyro in the early to mid game, that's beneficial, although not super required. Nasus is an absolute demon in this setup, but you want to make sure that he has triple defensive items. If you have half defensive items, for example, Sunfire, Cape, or other utilities such as Even Shroud, then you want to make sure that they're going on to some of the other frontline so that Nasus will stay extremely tanky. You can put your extra utility onto Hwei, and then once you get to level 9, you can start to itemize either Diana 2 or Smolder 2, as both of these can be great secondary carries. The standard 2-cost reroll comp of this set is going to be Akali and Nilah. This works really well because you can just stay level 6 and roll for both of them. They use very similar items, usually just generic AD plus healing. However, Akali does favor the Edge of Night because her dash will put her in a bit more vulnerable positions, whereas Nilah stays back with 2 range and is usually quite comfortable from behind. Of course, if you do hit Tahm Kench 2, then you want to itemize him as your main tank. However, because you're rolling on 6, sometimes you might opt into 3-starring one of these 3-star frontline units, and then you can just itemize them as well. Of course, Hecarim's not going to be as tanky as some of the other options, but they're all pretty decent if you 3-star them. Final S tier one we have is for Witchcraft. So the way this works is that your Witchcraft units are actually surprisingly tanky, and so you're going to be playing a bit more of a utility stall Karma. So instead of full damage, you're trying to nuke the enemy team. If you play her with this setup, with the blue buff Morello and the Gunblade, your frontline will stay alive for a very long time. It's pretty important that you have triple items onto your Fiora, otherwise she is going to die. You can sometimes replace some of these defensive options with an Edge of Night if you want to keep her alive for even longer, because if you only have one item on a Fiora 1, she's just going to be dying way too quickly. And of course, your standard tank items will go onto your Rakan. You don't really want to be itemizing the Nico or the Katarina, and of course Morgana will start to get leftover items, and once she gets to 2-star at level 9, then she actually is going to be quite formidable. Okay, so moving on to A tier, we have another variation of Karma. Same items on towards the Karma, and then just generic frontline items onto your Rakan and Taric. Ideally itemizing Taric, but you can itemize whoever you 2-star first. You'll notice we are utilizing the Morgana and the Diana there as well. So similar to the Witchcraft, except the fact that you are going to be stalling a lot longer as you don't have as much raw damage or burst damage coming out of the Fiora. The main disadvantage with this comp, as opposed to the previous S tier one, is that this board is a lot more expensive and requires you hitting legendaries. This means that it's very easy to play this comp from ahead, but if you roll down on level 8 and you have less than 30 gold, then you're going to find it very hard to stabilize, as it's going to be a while before you actually see these legendaries and these upgrades. Up next with Shapeshifter, this is the other 2-cost reroll comp of the set, except it's the ranged version. So Cassio up here doesn't actually technically cast out an ability this set, instead she turns her auto attacks into her E from League of Legends, the Twin Fang, I believe, and so she's going to be ramping up really quickly and doing a lot of damage, which is why she does so well with double Quinsus. The third item is pretty flexible, you can go Shiv for a little bit of extra consistent shred. Syndra really requires the Shojin so that she's getting as many casts off as possible, as she does have 60 mana, Nashor so that she can cast even more frequently, and then raw AP never hurts. You can substitute Rabadons for Archangels, JG, things like that. And then you want to itemize your Swain 3-star. You're rolling on level 6, so you should see a decent amount of copies of this, and then look to 3-star him on either level 7 or after you push 8. If you happen to get Nico 3, you can itemize her instead, however, Swain is the priority. With the 4 Scholar board, you are going to be carrying your Ryze, and then Tarek and Rakana are going to be your front lines, similar to before we saw with Karma. However, because Ryze has 4 Scholar, he doesn't technically need a Shojin. Shojins are still good, you can chuck them on Milio or Nora. Ryze does, however, need raw AP, as he's not getting any from his trait, so make sure you have either a Rabadon's or an Archangel's. And then Rageblade is really good because he scales with attack speed, and then also that's going to give him even more mana gen, as it is based on auto attacks this set. And then the third item is pretty flexible. You can go for JG or any other generic AP item. And then once you get to level 9, you do want to start itemizing your legendaries. So you can see here we have Diana, Morgana, Milio, and Nora. All of these are really great supports and carries. One of the standard 3-cost reroll comps this set is going to be mages, so you can play around Vex 3 and Veigar 3, of course rolling on level 7 until you 3-star all of them. The trick with this comp is you want to make sure that you're buying as many charms as possible to stack up that extra AP on towards your Veigar. Make sure that he has mana gen, ideally it's going to be blue buff, and then mages do need a source of AP because they're not actually getting any from mage, they're just casting their ability twice. So make sure he has either Rabadons or Archangels, and then you can go for Gunblade to keep your Vex alive, otherwise any generic AP item is fine. Once you push levels, you can eventually tech in Portal quite easily because you're going to be getting 2 Portal from both your Galio and your Nora. You can play around the Honeymancer trait as well, and ideally you have a mage +1, so you can fit in 5 mage quite easily. So moving down to B tier, you'll see that a lot of these comps actually require the +1, or are a lot better when you have the +1. So you really only want to be playing them when you get access to that, either from training sentinels, or you just happen to get a spatula. But keep in mind, a lot of these comps with the right setup can still technically be considered A tier. So we'll start off with Frost. So vertical Frost, you want to be carrying your Varus, and you can put your utility onto Hwei, as we've seen in some of the previous boards. And we are going to be using Nasus as our main front line. So this board is very, very similar to the one you would have seen previously. However, of course, that's a little bit less consistent, as you usually want to be playing this with the Frost +1. Next up, we have the vertical summon trait this set, which is of course going to be Eldritch. So you play this when you have an Eldritch +1, and then you want to make sure that you're itemizing your Karma. So Karma synergizes quite well there with the Syndra, getting the Encanter in. Karma utilizes similar items across all the board. And then Vex is going to be your main frontline. Although she's not a 4-cost, you have quite a lot of frontline anyway with the summon, of course. And then eventually, once you make your way towards level 9, you do want to try and get in Nora as well as Nami to make sure that you get 3 mage online. And then Briar is another really good way of capping out this board, as a 2-star Briar can enable you to actually play for first. However, this board is very, very much a tempo board, as if you're stuck rolling down on level 8, you're going to fall behind the lobby just because you're playing around a lot of 3 costs when others would be pushing levels, especially in a region where they all have a +1 as well. Next up, we have Chrono Karma. So we've seen Karma quite a lot. However, in this variation, we are going to be playing around 4 Chrono. And with this setup, you can actually duo carry your Kalista. So Rakan's going to be the main front line of this board. And because it caps around Camille and Morgana, you can actually cap quite high with this board. However, you will notice that when you're stuck on level 8, you do kind of have to freestyle a little bit here with the front line, as before you get access to the Camille and the Morgana, you can't actually play the 4 Chrono, and you kind of just have to play whatever multicast build-up setup you have. And of course, we do ideally want to be playing Cassio here to synergize with the Karma and get Encanter in line. And of course, then the best Witchcraft you're going to have is Morgana. So before you actually get access to the Morgana and the Camille, then of course you still want to be playing Witchcraft, so you can play around a Nico, and then you can play just another generic Shapeshifter to kind of fill the rest of the void. But you can see this board really only comes online once you get those legendaries. So it's a bit of an awkward board that requires very specific units, which is why it's considered B tier. Next up, we have Sugarcraft the +1. So if you have Sugarcraft +1, then you can play around Jinx Reroll, and then because you're rolling on level 7, you can of course look for Wukong as well. Now Wukong is a great splash unit that a lot of people will sometimes play if they don't have a next in. However, once you get to stage 4, most people will drop Wukong once they start to find their 4 costs, which makes it really, really easy to hit Wukong and Jinx, as these just aren't units picked up by other players. So if you do have access to the Sugarcraft, it's usually quite easy to hit this board when rolling down on level 7. And then of course Fiora is going to be your duo carry, and if you 3-star your Jinx and your Wukong, you're going to have a very, very easy time pushing levels because you're getting so many extra resources from the Sugarcraft as well, as you'll be getting gold, removers, other utility, and then of course the extra items. But only really play this board when you have the +1. Another variation to this board is that instead of itemizing the Jinx, you can just push levels, which means you don't actually need to play around the Wukong. And then of course you can itemize your Gwen and just play a board like this, and then you can just push levels and play the legendaries. This board caps out a lot stronger once you do get access to the Miller and the Morgana, but you can only fit those once you actually push levels. So it's very important that you get to level 9. And finally down here we have vertical bastions playing around Kalista. So this is a stall board. The Kalista will ramp up very, very quickly with the Rage Blade, and the bastions will just enable her to do so every single time, as 6 bastion will keep your front line alive for a very long time. Only really try and play this when you have the bastion +1, as generally there are a lot of other boards that just cap higher if you don't have access to that emblem. Morgana is going to be your main source of utility. Camille is going to be your secondary carry. So once you stabilize on level 8, you do want to try and get to level 9 as soon as possible, because it's very hard to play this board if you don't have Camille 2, or at least a Diana 2 that you can use a secondary carry, as Kalista on her own just isn't enough to deal with some of the other more healthy boards. And that is the end of the video. I hope you guys did enjoy watching. We will be posting some more comps, some of the ones that didn't quite make the cut as the meta starts to evolve and the set does go live. We also didn't touch on any of the comps which require either hero augments or very specific Ornn item setups in order to come online. So if you want to stay tuned and see some of those videos, then make sure to subscribe and stick around. Alright, that's all for me for today, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy this set 12 Team Juno tier list. Make sure to tune in to our streams tomorrow as we go live for set 12.